All right, good morning, everybody. Good to be here this morning. Good to be able to study with you this morning. And we are going to take a quick break from Romans this morning. Kind of a weird thing for me, and I know that you've noticed this, but if I'm preaching and teaching on the same three things every Sunday, I tend to get a little stir crazy. But I can't break from sermon series we're doing right now because we're trying to appoint elders, and so I'm going to be taking that out on Romans this morning instead. And we're going to do a quick study of a very brief book of the Bible. If you would just make your way to the book of 3 John. 3 John. It's what we call a one-chapter book of the Bible. Really all of them are no-chapter books of the Bible, but this one was short enough to where they didn't even add more than just one chapter. You may know the main reason why. Excuse me, my voice is giving me troubles this morning, so just look out for that. But you may know the main reason why the Apostle John ever picked up the pen to write any of his epistles, which was to address this problem that we call Gnosticism, which is really a complex thing. But what John was refuting was this idea that Jesus couldn't have been both God and man. They believed that flesh was inherently evil, so either Jesus just looked like he was a man but was actually just a spirit, or he wasn't God at all. To them, those were the only two options. John mainly deals with that in 1 John. In 2nd and 3rd John, what he's doing is dealing with a very specific aspect of this problem that the Gnostics have made for the church, which was how this affected missionaries, how this affected traveling missionaries. In 2 John, he wrote to the church telling them that they should reject the missionaries that are going around and teaching false things. But in this book, he tells them how to deal with missionaries who preach and teach the truth. Of course, Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 28:18-20, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore, make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things that I've commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And many took that to heart, as they should have and still do. And some fulfill that command in their own community, and that's perfectly fine, because whenever Jesus said to make disciples of all nations, guess which nation that includes? The nation that you live in. But for others, they hear make disciples of all nations, and they personally take that to mean that they need to go to these foreign nations and teach the gospel, which is equally great. And we need folks in foreign lands preaching and teaching the truth, along with folks here spreading the gospel in this country as well. And John is addressing what the response needs to be with these traveling missionaries. And being a traveling missionary was definitely possible in the first century because of the great organization of the known world at the time, which was due to the Roman Empire. Of course, Rome did some very terrible things. They also did some good things, just kind of logistically for the world. Rome took over the known world, and what was one thing that they did? They created roads, these broad highways that connected country to country, province to province, town to town. And there was also this thing that they put in place called the Pax Romana. Anybody know what that is? Yeah. Essentially it's don't break the rules and there won't be any problems. It was a rule of general peace, and that was kept strictly to where there was much less of a chance of like a highway robbery or anything like that sort. Otherwise, the state would catch on and then the operation would be shut down. Pax Romana was a very good thing for most people. The only problem with it from the viewpoint of a Christian is that they weren't going to be able to obey the government wholly. They couldn't submit to their gods, the chief god being Caesar himself. And so while the missionaries would need to keep the nature of their work on the down low, that they had ample opportunity to spread the gospel as the world was connected by Rome's roads. All right, let's get into the text, and if I could get someone to read the entirety of the letter, and then we'll break it up section by section.
They are to the beloved Gaius, whom I love and true. Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. For I was very glad brethren came and testified to your truth, that is, how you're walking in truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they are strangers. And they have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support such men, so that we may be fellow workers with the truth. I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words. And not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive them either, and he forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. And we had our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I have many things to write to you, but I'm not willing to write them to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we will speak face to face. Peace be to you. The friends, read the friends by name.
All right, thank you. Anything that stuck out to you from that reading? So Diotrephes is making problems for the church. Yep. What else? All right. All right, let's get to verses 1 through 4 once again. Again, the elder, the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in the truth. So notice that he addresses himself as the elder. And this probably has more to do with the fact that John's in his advanced age at this point. It seemed unlikely that he's calling himself an elder because he's an elder of the church, as his official elder of title would be kind of irrelevant since he's writing to a different congregation. Congregations are autonomous, of course. Now, in 2 John, he was writing to the elect lady, who I believe was the church or maybe a specific, again, congregation of the church as opposed to a person. Who is he writing this letter to? Yeah, Gaius or Gaius. Gaius is mentioned 4 times and other times in the New Testament. There's a chance that he's always speaking of the same person. Acts 19:29, 20 and verse 4, 1 Corinthians 1:14, Romans 16:23, all mention him. So it could be the same person in all 5 references, but it was also kind of a common Roman name, so it could be different Gaiuses. Regardless of this Gaius, John says 2 different things about him: that he's a dear friend of his, and that he loves the truth, loves him in truth. And maybe by this, John maybe means that he truly loves him. However, truth is kind of a common theme throughout the epistles of John as well. So he's more likely saying that he and Gaius have loved the truth and have this common bond in their love together. We also find John identifying himself with Gaius in the letters at times. Verse 8, we therefore ought to receive such that we may become fellow workers for the truth. Verse 14, but I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. In verse 2, we find John wishing them good health, both spiritually and physically. And notice in particular what he said about Gaius in verse 3, that the brethren testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. What was Paul glad to hear about? He was glad to hear about that Gaius believed the truth. But not only that, but he also acted on it as well. You know, sometimes we can get so caught up in doctrine that we forget about the other side of the equation. We want to make it all about making sure we all believe the exact same things and making sure everyone's just as sound as I am, and that's important. But John was also as concerned about whether Gaius was acting upon that sound doctrine as well. So Christianity is not just about people who read the Bible for academic purposes We're not just striving to be biblical scholars, but there's nothing wrong with that. But God is much more concerned about, of course, if we're acting upon what he said through his word, rather than if we can quote the whole thing off the top of our heads, right? Yes, it's an act of faith. We want to be doers of the word, not just hearers only. Any other thoughts through verse 4? Darryl?
It's interesting to me that as John is, in these three books, is trying to make sure that the truth is what's being preached and carried forward. And here, it's obvious that he knows that he's not the only source of truth.
Right.
He's recognizing other brothers and recognizes who is preaching truth and who is not, so that discernment is available to more than just him and maybe the apostles or leaders. Other people can know the truth and make that discernment.
Yeah. And if we have time to get there, we'll talk about this. But I think 3 John is all about contrasts. He uses these different characters, tells them, be like this guy, don't be like this guy. That is exactly what Diotrephes wouldn't do, was accept that, anyone else had anything of use to offer. Yes, absolutely. All right, look at verses 5 through 8 once again. It said, Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for the strangers who have borne witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well, because they went forth for his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such, that we may become fellow workers for the truth. So we find here in verses 5 through 8, one of the main reasons that John is writing this letter, and that is, again, to tell them to receive the missionaries who do speak the truth. What we find here is a commendation for Gaius, because he did accept missionaries. These might have been people that John knew personally, people that were from his community that he sent out personally out on their mission. And then Gaius accepted them into his home, and perhaps along with some of the other homes of the other members of the church in his community. John calls them brethren. He also calls them strangers, because to Gaius, they were strangers. But even though they were strangers, because Gaius knew that they were those who went around teaching the truth, that they were his brethren, and he accepted them. Of course, we're talking about qualifications of elders. We'll finish that this morning. One of those is being hospitable, which I mentioned last week is literally a lover of strangers. That's what we see exactly in this man. And it seems that these missionaries who reported back to John, this is information back to John, as he said in verse 6, who have borne witness of your love before the church. I'm assuming that this report is how John knew to write this letter in the first place. They were the ones who reported to John that Gaius and others were walking in truth. And so John encourages Gaius to help them continue in their mission when he said, if you send them forward, in their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well. And so John is putting his stamp of approval on these men. He's telling Gaius that it would be good for them to continue on their mission, but it wasn't just because John knew these people, or perhaps he did, but the reason that they should continue their journey is what he said in verse 7, because they went forth for his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. When it comes to traveling missionaries, through the books of 2nd and 3rd John, John tells the brethren to put them to the test. Of course, you remember back to 1 John in chapter 4 and verse 1, when he said, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And so we see that in principle there, and then borne out an application in 2nd and 3rd John. Again, when it comes to these traveling missionaries, John tells them to put them to the test, and here's the test that he tells the brethren to put them through. He says, if they faithfully proclaim the doctrine of Christ, 2 John 7, if they have set out not for personal gain, but for his name's sake, 3 John 7, then they should be both received and helped forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, 3 John verse 6. That's the test. And we know that hospitality is a part of Christian living. Paul told the Christians in Rome in Romans 12:13 to distribute the needs of the saints and to be given hospitality. Hebrews 13:1 and 2, the Hebrew writer tells them to let brotherly love continue and to not forget to entertain strangers. But John tells them here that they can't just accept anybody into their homes. If they believe and teach error, he says, don't receive them into their homes. But what about those who believe and teach the truth? Again, verse 8. We therefore ought to receive such, that we may become fellow workers for the truth. And why was John telling them to treat those who couldn't pass this test this way? Is he just being cruel and cold? What do you think? Okay, he's weeding out. Yep.
It's without anybody express their own thoughts and ideas. Make sure the truth.
Right. That's his main priority, making sure the truth is being taught. The point wasn't to be cruel, cold, or unkind to those who don't believe the truth. We have to be obviously kind to those people. We have to care for those people. But what? We cannot aid and abet in their efforts. We cannot further their efforts of teaching and preaching error. And so John says, don't receive them into your homes. And now he tells them, just as vehemently as they keep those who teach error out of their homes, that they ought to receive those who teach truth into their homes. There weren't any hotels in these days, or not at least as many as we might have, or that concept that we might have. If you were traveling from town to town for any reason, where would you go? Where would you find lodging? Somewhere. Someone's home. Yeah. You were relying on the kindness of strangers, something that we, don't do too much of a day and to some degree really can't do like they did back then. And so these missionaries would go to a different town and perhaps with a helpful tip from someone, they'd find a house of one of their brethren and knock, knock, knock. I hear you're a brother and sister in Christ. I hear you're a member of the congregation here. And then somehow they would test this missionary to see if they passed that test. And if they passed, John said to receive them. Now notice again on whose behalf these missionaries were sent forth from verse 7. Because they went forth for his name's sake. What does that mean to you? Going for on behalf of Christ's name's sake. Okay, preaching his word. This denotes two different things to me. First, they went forth by the authority of Christ. Paul said in Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And when they went forth on these missions, they were doing so by the authority of the name of Christ and what he said to do when he said to make disciples of all nations. It also denotes their motive too. They didn't do what they did out of selfish motives. They weren't going from town to town to make a name for themselves, but rather they were trying to magnify the Lord by doing what he told them to do. And what does it mean to magnify something? Yeah, make it larger, to make it great. When you put a magnifying glass on something, you're enlarging and emphasizing it. Is that what we're doing? Of course, Psalm 34 and verse 3. Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. Just got to ask ourselves always, is that what we're doing in life? As we go through life, are we doing so for his praise or for our own? It's a fair question to ask because, at times we can be acting so selfishly without even realizing it. Lest we forget that we were put on this planet. We were given life to magnify and exalt somebody else. And not ourselves. If we can get to the end of this life and the only thing that can be said of us is that we pointed others towards God and not ourselves, that'd be a successful life. That'd be a life that God would call successful. And we'll return to that thought here in a little bit. Any questions or comments through verse 8? Yes, sir.
So, there's a translation of this word hospitality, because another versions, ESV and NHV, they translated it as support, which to me has a different connotation. Support could be hospitality, bringing somebody into your house, but it could also mean more than that.
Yeah.
And supporting them beyond your household. And so I don't know what thoughts on that, but it seems to be making the case here that we should be supporting. He was telling them to support these people, not just like stay at your house.
Right.
But he also said he uses the same phrase towards the pagan that these missionaries did not receive or did not accept support from pagans, the non-believing.
Yeah. Well, I haven't really done much looking into that. I'd really have to come look at what the Greek word for that is to really. But if it is support, how we would think about it, it could be physically or actually inviting them in our homes, or it could be financial or anything like that. You don't have to, in order to support missionaries, I don't think you have to have them in your home, or you don't even have to know them personally. But again, just helping their efforts, making sure that they're successful in any way.
Yeah, I don't know which more is more accurate, but the support connotation seems to be
Yeah.
to fit better to what.
Right. That fits better for like every Christian, and it's an easier thing to attain. Absolutely. All right. Look at verses 9 through 12 once again. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness and know that our testimony is true. So the first main reason that John wrote this letter was to commend Gaius for receiving these missionaries and telling and sending them onward on their mission. And the other main reason that he wrote is what we find here in verses 9 through 12, and that is the Diotrephes problem. Now, like I mentioned, this letter is very rooted in characters. And there's 4 characters in this chapter. The elder, John, Gaius, Diotrephes, and Demetrius. And what we find from the transition from verses 5 through 8 and then 9 through 12 is a contrast. Diotrephes is contrasted to Gaius. What did we see about Gaius? He walked in the truth. He loved the brethren, and he showed hospitality to strangers. What do we see about Diotrephes? That he loves himself more than others. He refused to house missionaries, and he forbid others from housing these missionaries as well. A stark contrast. And what did John say that Diotrephes loved to have? He loved to have the preeminence. What does that mean? What does preeminence mean? Importance, ranking, first. It literally means to be first, to put yourself first. Or literally it means to like or love to be in first in rank or position. So Diotrephes loved being first. There are 2 main problems with this desire to be first. First, it completely contradicts fundamental Christian living. Something that tells me that Diotrephes was going to do what he wanted to do regardless of what God said, regardless of what the apostles and others had written through the scriptures. But remember what Paul said in Philippians 2, 1 through 4. Therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. And if you remember in that context, Paul goes on to use Christ as the ultimate example of humility, how he was and is God, yet humbled himself, came in the form of a bondservant who died that cruel death on the cross. And of that example, what did he say? Chapter 2 and verse 5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So Diotrephes was clearly contradicting what was expected of him just as a Christian, just to be humble and to recognize that he's under Christ. The other main problem related also comes from something that Paul said. Notice Colossians 1, 15 through 18. Speaking of Jesus, he says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body of the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. So in light of this passage, what's the problem with Diotrephes wanting the preeminence? He's not God. The problem is that preeminence only belongs to, if we're going to talk about people, one person, belongs to Christ, belongs to, God obviously in his three distinct persons, but in particular the preeminence belongs to Christ because as Paul said, he is the firstborn of God and the firstborn of the dead. So, not only do we have a man who claimed to be a Christian, whose life completely contradicted what Christian living is all about by putting himself ahead of others, but also think about this. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus was born as a man in this world as God's only begotten Son. Jesus died a cruel death on the cross to save our souls. He was the firstborn from the dead when God raised him from the dead. Yet this man wants all of that glory and all of that prestige of what Jesus accomplished for himself. Isn't that amazing? That you would want to put yourself there? Isn't it amazing that a mere man who was nothing special was elevating himself to a place where only God should be? That's the worst part of Diotrephes.
He did what he did. Why he was allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Or is that particular congregation.
Yeah.
Do we have any other history on Diotrephes? I don't know. Other than what we see here, I just wonder how in the world did he get into that position?
Yeah, well, I've seen it in my very limited time, so you've definitely seen it in your time. You have one man who has a strong will, who wants to, make his way throughout the congregation, and a lot of people who apathy or whatever it is, just let him go ahead and do it. Let him, fly the plane. Jackie, you had something? Well, yes, absolutely. That's what God's doing through John right here, and he's making him an example of what not to be. Yeah. Mark, you have something as well?
Joe Olstein.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah. You mentioned Brigham Young. He mentioned Brigham Young of the Mormon faith. Joseph Smith is thought to be someone who's going to be sitting with God and with Jesus on the day of judgment. How much more of wanting the preeminence is something like that. Anyway, that's what Diotrephes was doing, which was loving the preeminence, refusing missionaries, forbidding others to accept missionaries. And so what he was doing was heinous, and the apostle had to correct what he was doing. And I said that Diotrephes was the other main reason that John wrote this letter, but he may have been, basically the whole reason why this letter was written. Because if he wasn't forbidding others from receiving missionaries, I don't know that John would ever feel the need to write telling them to do so. Not often do we find an author of an epistle writing a letter because of things that one man caused. Usually it's a group of individuals. But Diotrephes was causing so much chaos in the church that John had to write a whole letter about him. That wouldn't be a good feeling, by the way. I wouldn't want an apostle writing a letter just about me. And it's an unfortunate fact that there are many Diotrephes still in the church today. Again, in my very limited time, I've seen many situations among congregations where there's one man pulling the strings. Sometimes it's an elder because he was put in that position of authority. Sometimes it's the preacher for some reason. Sometimes it's a member who, let's say, brings a lot of the revenue in to the church. The church kind of relies on his contribution. A lot of times it's one man who thinks he can quote unquote run the show, and so he does what he thinks is best because he wants the preeminence for himself. He loves to be first, whereas being a Christian always involves thinking of yourself third. Jesus, what are the greatest of the commandments? Love God, love others. Where does that put me? Third, last. We'll return to some of those thoughts from this section, but let's, Mark, did you have something?
I think, what you mentioned, different individuals, what church
Say again. What was that?
It's just the individual shout.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Loudest one usually wins. Because the others just get so tired of him, they just want to give up too. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. And then John ends the book by saying in verses 13 and 14, I had many things to write, but I do not wish to write to you with pen and ink, but I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. Peace to you, our friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. You compare this to the greeting that he had said at the end of 2 John, which is verses 12 and 13. I was supposed to have a slide there, but it's not. Anyway, he said, having many things to write to you, I do not wish to do so with paper and ink, but I hope to come back to speak face to face, that our joy may be full. The children of your elect sister greet you. So is there any question that the author of these two letters is the same man? It's not. But, every time authorship is in question, these supposed biblical scholars like to cast a shadow of doubt on just about everything, and I truly think they do so to sound smarter than others. They don't want to stand out, so they'll concoct these theories that contradict contemporary thinking, but it's just as clear as day that John is still the author here. It's also just as clear how much he loved Gaius and these other brethren. He obviously knows the value of him writing these letters as such, but by his own admission, nothing beats face-to-face interaction. All right, now as we begin to conclude, here's a question, and it's a very broad question, so I'll give you some time to think about it. What makes a good person? What constitutes a good person? Okay, genuinely being interested in others. Good answer. Check. Say that again. Oh. Someone who's just focused on, just. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else?
One who tries to do right.
One who tries to do right. Fair enough. Some say that we can't say that anyone is a good person. And they'll call upon places like Romans 3:10. Paul there, quoting from Psalm 14, says, as is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. And the word righteous, which is a little different from the psalm that he's quoting, said, when it says in Psalm 14 and verse 3, they have all turned aside, they've all turned together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. The psalmist was speaking about a very specific people in his day, so I'm not so sure that we can apply that to all of mankind. And before Paul quoted that, we can see that in the verse prior, where he said in Romans 3 and verse 9, he said, what then, are we better than they? Not all, for we have all previously charged that both Jews and Greeks, that they are all under sin. So he's talking about sin. He's talking about that all have sinned, fallen short of God's glory. Everyone's sinned, nobody's perfect, and nobody's going to argue with that. They may also point to what Jesus said in Matthew 19:17. Matthew 19:16-17, he said, now behold, one came and said to him, good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? So he said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter life, keep the commandments. And that sounds compelling until you realize what Jesus was doing. He was speaking about standards, particularly seen in the book of Matthew. By what standard were they measuring goodness? By the standard of the scribes and the Pharisees, which is why I told him, Matthew 5 and verse 20, that their righteousness ought to exceed that of the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus is simply telling that man to keep the actual commandments of God as the standard. The phrase, no one is good but one, that is God, for arguing that no one can be good, would be more compelling had it not been for the various times where Jesus himself and also the apostles would make references to a good man. Matthew 12:35. A good man of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. Same recorded in Luke 6:45. This is how Luke described Barnabas when he saw that he was preaching the gospel and going forward in Acts 11:23 and 24. He said when he came and had seen the grace of God, he was glad and encouraged them with all the purpose of heart that they should continue with the Lord, for he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith, and a great many people were added to the Lord. Romans 5:7 and 8, for scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love towards us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So it's clear to me that it's possible to be called a good man or a good woman or a good person. Aristotle, obviously the famed philosopher, student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates, he argued correctly, in my estimation, that something is good whenever it functions according to its purpose. Something is good when it functions according to its purpose. What makes a good lawnmower? Yeah, if it actually turns on is really the right answer. But if it does its job, if how well it cuts grass. Is that to say that a lawnmower that does cut grass is a perfect lawnmower? No. Maybe it doesn't move as fast as you like it to. Maybe it doesn't start until the 17th or 18th try. Maybe it cuts the grass too short and the adjustment thing is broken and you just can't adjust it. But it's still a good lawnmower in the fact that it accomplishes its purpose. You know, this pulpit. Is this a perfect pulpit? No, it's not. It wobbles. It's uneven. If this microphone was on, if I banged on it, it'd make a loud and unpleasant noise. It's free, and that's always best. Is it a good pulpit? Can I set my notes and my Bible and leave it there? Yes, I can. It serves its purpose. It's a good pulpit, or podium, whatever you want to call it. So whenever someone in the Bible is called a good purpose, if Aristotle is correct, that means that these were people who accomplished their purpose. What's our ultimate purpose in life? It is to glorify God. Glorify God, enjoy Him forever. So the most basic lesson of 3 John is this, and it comes from verse 11. Imitate good, not evil. Imitate good, not evil. That's very simple, but that's how John speaks throughout all 3 of his epistles. He's very fundamental, very plain, very black and white. This is what we need to do. This is what we don't need to do. This is good and this is bad. This is right. This is wrong. Right? Yeah, exactly. You know, these are the things that those who work according to the flesh do. These are the things who have the Spirit in them do. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in 3 John, he's telling to imitate good and evil. How did he show us to do that? Once again, through these different characters. These 3 men, Gaius, Diotrephes, Demetrius, he's telling us either be like this man or do not be like this man. So let's do that. Let's be a Gaius. Let's all be Gaius. Let's love the truth. Let's let the truth live in us. Let's live it out as well. And if those who spread the good news want help in their efforts, let's accept them and send them on their way or support them however we can. Let's be a Demetrius. We didn't really look at him too much, but look again from verse 12, who John said bore witness that Demetrius has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself. Both God and man testified that Demetrius was himself a good man. Don't we want that as well? Wouldn't you want God and men, others, giving a good testimony about you? And then, of course, let's not be a Diotrephes. Let's not love the preeminence, but let's give God the glory first and foremost. Let's put others ahead of ourselves and not quench that which is good, like he did when he rejected these missionaries and forbade them from housing them as well. Being a good person, if we view that in prospect of what John says, it's not that hard at all. If we just fulfill our purpose of glorifying God in all the specific ways that we do that or not do that, we have in these examples. Any questions or comments before we close the study out?
When he says putting them out of the church, does that mean doesn't accept them into the fellowship, or does it mean throws them out of the building?
This is what Diotrephes did, right? Forbids those who wish to put them. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he physically threw him out the building. I don't know. It could be more so probably just excommunicated from the church and all the blessings of it.
Again, for him, that kind of
Right.
mind lock.
Yeah.
You got to get you got to beat it. That can happen. But it does, like you said.
And it also reminds us, thinking about elders, why there has to be elders, not just one elder, because that power can go to that one man's head and he can easily turn to a Diotrephes. Joe?
Sometimes in the
That's right. Head elder, yeah. 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 Yep, I've seen that as well. And it's just as maybe even more, if not more destructive than literally just having one elder than having others who are under him per se. Yep. All right, there's nothing else. I did not open with the prayer, so let's close with the prayer. Father and God, we thank you for this morning, and we thank you for your word, and we thank you for every book of your book, and we thank you for even the small ones, even the seemingly insignificant ones that we can glean great lessons from and learn great things. Thank you so much for Jesus. He is the reason that we're here this morning. He has brought us together and has bound us together by his blood and his love. Thank you so much for him. Be with us as we worship, and it's through Jesus I pray. Amen.